The rain was relentless against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Vance Global, but Clara Thorne barely noticed. She was too busy scrubbing the marble floors of the executive lobby. Her back ached, her hands were raw from cheap soap, and the eviction notice in her pocket felt heavier than lead. As she moved her mop toward the grand entrance, something caught the dim security lights. It was a watch. Not just any watch, but a custom platinum timepiece that cost more than her entire life. She recognized the engraving on the back. It belonged to Julian Vance, the ruthless CEO who owned the very building she was cleaning. Upstairs in the penthouse office, Julian Vance was pouring a glass of scotch he did not want. His business partner, Damien Sterling, was pacing the room, listing every reason why the board was ready to push Julian out. A recent scandal, engineered behind the scenes by Damien but cleverly blamed on Julian, had painted the CEO as an irresponsible playboy. Their biggest potential investor, a conservative billionaire from Tokyo, was threatening to pull out unless Julian proved he was a stable, grounded family man. Julian scoffed at the idea. He did not do relationships, and he certainly did not do fake apologies. The heavy oak doors of the office opened, and a breathless security guard stepped in, followed closely by a woman in a damp, oversized grey uniform. Julian narrowed his eyes. Clara stood there, holding the platinum watch. She did not look at the opulent surroundings or the expensive art on the walls. She looked straight into Julian's cold, calculating eyes. She walked past the guard, placing the heavy watch on the mahogany desk. "You dropped this by the private elevator, Mr. Vance," Clara said, her voice steady and completely devoid of the awe people usually showed him. Julian stared at the watch, then at her. He pulled out a sleek leather wallet, extracting a thick stack of $100 bills. He slid the money across the desk. "For your trouble," he said, his tone dismissing her entirely. Clara looked at the money, a muscle feathering in her jaw. The eviction notice in her pocket screamed at her to take it. It would pay her rent for months. Instead, she pushed the money back across the polished wood. "Keep your money, Mr. Vance. I did not return it for a reward. I returned it because it is not mine." Julian froze. Damien stopped pacing. People in Julian's world always wanted something. They always had a price. But this cleaning woman in her soaked boots and frayed uniform was looking at him with absolute pity. "If you think playing the saint will get you a promotion, you are wasting your time," Julian said, leaning forward. Clara let out a dry, humorless laugh. "I do not want a promotion in your company. I want to finish my shift and go home. Have a good night, gentlemen." She turned on her heel and walked out. Julian watched the door close, his mind racing. The investor wanted someone stable, someone with unshakable morals, someone who could not be bought. He looked at the stack of rejected cash and then at Damien. He had just found the perfect solution to his public relations nightmare. The next morning, Clara was summoned not to the cleaning supervisor's basement office, but back to the penthouse. Julian was waiting for her, this time holding a legally binding contract. He offered her $2 million to pretend to be his fiancée for 6 months, just long enough to secure the Japanese investment and stabilize the board. Clara read the document carefully. When she reached a clause about non-disclosure and asset forfeiture, her breath hitched. The legal phrasing was identical to the contract that had destroyed her father's company 10 years ago, a company swallowed whole by Vance Global. She swallowed the bitter taste of old grief and looked up at the arrogant man who had no idea who she really was. "I will do it," Clara said, her voice turning dangerously soft. "But I have conditions. I am not a doll for you to dress up. I will attend your galas, I will smile for the cameras, but you do not own my voice. And you will not tell me how to think." Julian stepped closer, invading her space, trying to intimidate her with his height and power. "You are a paid employee, Miss Thorne. You will do exactly as I say." Clara did not back down. She tilted her chin up, her eyes blazing. "Then find another employee to marry you, Mr. Vance, because I am the only one who can save your reputation right now, and we both know it." A spark of genuine surprise flared in Julian's chest. No one spoke to him like that. He grabbed a gold pen and signed the document, sliding it toward her. "Welcome to my world, Clara. Let us see if you survive it." By the end of the week, the news of the billionaire playboy getting engaged to a mystery woman had broken the internet. Clara was thrust into a suffocating world of silk gowns, flashing cameras, and venomous whispers. At their first public gala, Damien Sterling stood in the corner watching Clara with narrowed, suspicious eyes. He knew something was wrong. A ruthless shark like Julian did not fall in love with a nobody. Damien silently vowed to dig into her past until he found the lie that would destroy them both. Meanwhile, Julian stood by Clara's side, his hand resting possessively on her lower back for the cameras. She was supposed to be a prop, a temporary fix to a corporate problem. But as she effortlessly shut down a condescending reporter with sharp, polite irony, Julian found himself pulling her just a fraction closer. The fake engagement had begun, but the danger they were stepping into was entirely real. Living in Julian's sprawling glass penthouse was like being trapped inside a beautiful icebox. Clara refused to touch the extravagant designer wardrobe he had ordered for her, choosing to wear her own simple dresses instead. One evening, Julian tossed a heavy velvet box onto the kitchen island where she was reading a book. Inside was a diamond necklace heavy enough to choke someone. He demanded she wear it to the upcoming investor dinner so she would look the part. Clara calmly closed the box and pushed it back across the marble counter. She told him that she was his fake fiancée, not a mannequin for his wealth, and that she would wear her own mother's simple silver pendant. Julian's jaw tightened in frustration. He was used to women who begged for his table scraps, but Clara stared right through his billions, completely unimpressed. It infuriated him, yet he found he could not look away. The bitter tension between them unexpectedly shifted late one rainy Tuesday. Julian returned from a brutal 12-hour board meeting, looking completely drained. He collapsed onto the living room sofa, rubbing his temples, expecting Clara to ignore him or throw another sharp comment his way. Instead, she quietly walked into the room and placed a warm mug of chamomile tea on the glass table beside him. She did not say a single word. She simply draped a soft blanket over the back of the couch and turned to leave. Julian reached out, catching her wrist. His touch was hesitant, completely lacking his usual domineering grip. He whispered a soft thank you into the quiet room, and for a fleeting second, the massive walls between them vanished. But their fragile peace was shattered just days later. Damien Sterling had not stopped digging into Clara's background, and he finally struck gold. He left a sleek black folder on Julian's desk, with a handwritten note that warned Julian to look closely at who he had brought into his home. Julian opened the file, his blood running entirely cold. Birth certificates, old financial records, news clippings. Clara Thorne was the daughter of Arthur Thorne. The founder of the modest tech firm Vance Global had aggressively dismantled and absorbed exactly 10 years ago. The ruthless, hostile takeover had left her family completely bankrupt, driving her father to a stress-induced heart attack and an early grave. Julian stormed into the penthouse that night, slamming the heavy folder onto the dining table. When Clara saw the documents spill out, her face went deathly pale, but she did not shrink away. Julian yelled, accusing her of being a corporate spy, of planning a long game to ruin him from the inside out. Clara's voice trembled, not with fear, but with a decade of buried, agonizing grief. She told him that he had no idea the destruction his blind ambition caused regular people. She admitted that she hated everything he stood for when they first met, but she had never planned this arrangement. She had signed his twisted contract simply to survive the crushing poverty his own company had forced upon her. The devastating truth hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Julian realized with a sinking chest that she was not a gold digger or a spy. She was his victim. After that explosive night, a suffocating silence fell over the penthouse. Clara did the bare minimum for the cameras, smiling at the galas, but behind closed doors, she treated Julian like a ghost. For the first time in his entirely privileged life, Julian Vance felt genuine, crushing regret. He knew better than to buy her jewelry or cars to fix his mistakes. Instead, he began paying absolute attention. When Clara came home from a walk, she found her favorite obscure blend of roasted coffee waiting on the kitchen counter. Julian quietly ordered his legal team to track down her father's old stolen patents and silently transfer the ownership back into her name. He even cancelled a high-profile golf game just to sit in the same room while she read, demanding absolutely nothing, simply offering his quiet, non-judgmental presence. But their silent, delicate truce was about to be weaponized. Damien Sterling watched their fractured dynamic from afar with a satisfied, cruel smirk. The Tokyo investors were arriving at the end of the week for the final signing ceremony. Damien had everything perfectly arranged. He was going to expose the fraudulent marriage contract and Clara's true vengeful identity to the press and the board simultaneously. He would frame Julian for corporate fraud and gross negligence, finally taking the CEO position for himself. A massive storm was brewing, and Julian and Clara were completely blind to the trap closing tightly around them. The grand ballroom of the Vance Global headquarters was bathed in the warm glow of crystal chandeliers, but the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. The Tokyo investors sat at the head table, sipping champagne and nodding politely as Julian gave his welcoming address. Clara stood by his side, wearing a simple yet elegant emerald dress, her posture perfect despite the anxiety twisting in her chest. As Julian finished his speech and stepped away from the microphone, Damien Sterling moved out of the shadows. He confidently took the stage, holding up a thick manila envelope for the entire room to see. Damien announced that transparency was the core value of Vance Global, and he felt it was his duty to share the truth about their chief executive. He dramatically pulled out the marriage contract and the dossier on Clara's true identity, projecting copies onto the massive screens behind the stage. The room erupted into shocked murmurs. Damien smirked, turning to the Tokyo delegation, loudly declaring Julian a fraud who had hired a victim of their own corporate greed to play his blushing bride just to secure their money. Julian did not panic. He did not shout or call for security. Instead, he calmly walked back to the microphone, his presence commanding absolute silence. He looked directly at Damien and agreed with him. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Julian admitted that he had been blind, arrogant, and cruel in the past. He confessed that he had indeed drawn up that contract, but the woman standing beside him had refused to be bought. Julian then reached into his own jacket and pulled out a sleek external drive, plugging it into the podium. New documents flashed across the screen. They were not just the restored patents belonging to Clara's father, but a detailed financial trail, proving that Damien had orchestrated the hostile takeover 10 years ago, embezzling millions from both companies to fund his own private offshore accounts. The Tokyo investors stood up in outrage, but not at Julian. They glared at Damien, whose confident smirk had completely vanished, replaced by a pale, trembling panic. The fallout was swift and brutal. Security escorted a stammering, humiliated Damien out of the building as the investors immediately withdrew their support from his remaining ventures. The media, hungry for a scandal, instantly shifted their focus, praising Clara as the rightful heir who had reclaimed her family legacy, and Julian as the executive who finally cleaned house. But as the flashing cameras and reporters swarmed them, Clara slipped away, retreating to the quiet solitude of the penthouse. Hours later, Julian found her standing on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker in the cool night air. He stepped outside, keeping a respectful distance. He told her that Damien was gone, the board had been restructured, and her father's patents were completely and permanently hers. He then pulled the original marriage contract from his pocket and slowly tore it into pieces, letting the wind carry the paper away into the darkness. He looked at her with complete vulnerability, stripping away the armor he had worn his entire life. Julian quietly confessed that he did not know how to be a good man, but she had made him want to learn. He told her she was free to walk away, to take her company and never see him again, but if she stayed, he would spend the rest of his life earning the right to stand beside her. Clara turned to him, the cold city wind whipping her hair. She saw no arrogance, no corporate shark looking for a deal. She saw a man who had finally learned the value of a single, sincere heartbeat. Without saying a word, she stepped forward and rested her hand against his chest, right over his heart, choosing to stay. The seasons shifted, carrying away the bitter memories of the past and bringing a quiet, unshakable peace. A year later, Clara opened the doors to Thorn Innovations, a new tech firm built on the foundation of her father's dreams. Julian stood proudly in the background, not as a controlling executive, but as a silent, supportive partner who cheered her every victory. They spent their evenings not in cold, empty penthouses, but in a warm home filled with laughter, shared coffee, and the quiet comfort of mutual respect. It was no longer a contract. It was a life built on truth. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear a good story of love and redemption. Subscribe to the channel to follow along with the next stories we have waiting for you. We will see you next time.
The visual analysis of Julian and Clara explores the intricate layers of power dynamics and emotional vulnerability and corporate morality. At the beginning, the narrative establishes a stark social contrast. Clara represents unwavering integrity forged in hardship, scrubbing floors while carrying the burden of an impending eviction. In complete opposition stands Julian, a cynical executive who views every human interaction as a mere transaction. When Clara returns his priceless watch and completely rejects his financial reward, she shatters his rigid worldview. This interaction serves as the psychological catalyst for the entire story, demonstrating how absolute integrity becomes the only force capable of disrupting extreme arrogance. Julian realizes that Clara cannot be bought, which ironically makes her the perfect shield for his crumbling public image. This transitions into the psychology of their contractual arrangement. Julian attempts to maintain control by offering a lucrative contract for a fake engagement, demonstrating how wealth is weaponized to manipulate circumstances. However, Clara reclaims her agency by setting strict conditions. She absolutely refuses to be silenced or molded into an obedient corporate prop. The underlying dynamic reveals a fascinating shift in power. Although Julian holds the financial capital, Clara holds the moral high ground. Her insistence on wearing her own simple jewelry rather than his expensive diamonds is a powerful symbol of identity preservation in the face of suffocating materialism. The emotional turning point of their journey is marked by a simple cup of chamomile tea. In a world where Julian is constantly surrounded by people who demand things from him, Clara offers an unprompted gesture of care, expecting absolutely nothing in return. This quiet moment breaks down the massive emotional walls Julian has built around himself. It marks the exact shift from a hostile arrangement to genuine human vulnerability. It is the first time Julian experiences authentic empathy, laying the groundwork for the profound regret he is about to face. When the dark truth of their shared past surfaces, the narrative delves into the devastating human cost of corporate greed. Damien, the true manipulator, weaponizes the history of Clara, exposing that the company owned by Julian destroyed her father a decade earlier. The story deeply examines the intersection of grief and guilt and accountability. Clara is revealed not as a spy but as a victim forced into an alliance with the destroyer of her family just to survive. This forces Julian to confront his blind ambition. His subsequent reaction signifies true character growth, shifting from trying to buy forgiveness to silently earning it through restorative justice. The climax at the Grand Gala perfectly subverts expectations. When Damien attempts his hostile takeover by exposing the fake marriage, Julian refuses to deny the accusations. Instead, he embraces complete accountability. By confessing his past cruelty and exposing the embezzlement committed by Damien, Julian dismantles the toxic foundation of his empire to protect Clara. The final resolution shows the ultimate transition from a contractual obligation to a true partnership. Julian tears up the original contract, completely relinquishing control, and supports Clara as she rebuilds her legacy. The story beautifully demonstrates that true redemption requires the surrender of power, and genuine love can only thrive on a foundation of absolute mutual respect.